Yeah, I'm Dr. Alice. I'm the school psychologist at UC High School. I've been here about 6 years, but I've been a school psych for 15, long time.
To you, what is the ideal workplace relationship between a student and a teacher?
I think my favorite teachers around here are the ones that had a hard time in high school. Those seem to be the ones that kind of get it a little bit more and seem to reach out to a broader understanding of students. You have to give students enough information about yourself to establish that you're both humans and want to move forward together at this, like, you're kind of a team and you're moving forward. That being said, I also find teachers fare a little bit better if they come in with a few more rules at the beginning of the year and then ease up a little bit rather than try to figure out the rules as they go along. But I think there's kind of that. It's an unusual relationship. I mean, they're not a parent; they're an adult in that child's life. They're not a friend. But so they need to have these boundaries. They need to have, you're working towards a goal, and it takes a very specific kind of person to be a good teacher and to reach all these kids and to understand what each of them needs. So,
With that quote unquote shorter distance with students, what do you think of today's workplace relationship? Do you like it? Do you dislike it? Do you think it's unhealthy?
I like it. I think it's opening up more conversations in terms of what you're saying, in terms of mental health, and in terms of educating the whole child rather than just that one subject that they're doing. I think we need to, at schools, take on that responsibility of educating and teaching students about all these different aspects of the world and what it means to be an adult and what it means to be a functioning human. And I think we need to teach things, remind kids about politeness and how to interact with somebody in all these different ways, to let them know that, when an issue happens, therapy is a good idea. This is why we have to teach sex ed at this level. I mean, I don't think we can often trust what the information they're going to get at home. And it's going to be inconsistent in this way. At least we know that we're preparing kids, for these next stages of life. It's challenging. Teachers are taught how to teach. They're not necessarily taught how to do all these other things. I think it depends on their personality. And
Right.
You also have to make sure your students are perceiving this correctly. Are they seeking out this level of support and wanting this interaction with them?
But have you found yourself kind of quote unquote counseling teachers on this, kind of reminding them, or do you? Really?
I have a magnet over there that says, I am a psychologist, I am not your psychologist. And I oftentimes will have teachers walk in here and be like, I'm ignoring that and sit down. But it is, and I think it's hard sometimes when teachers are triggered by students, whether it's students being defiant or a kid having a really hard time of like, they have all this family stuff going on and they maybe share that with the teacher. And if they have their own stuff going on, I think that can be really, really difficult and hard for them to hold. So,
In which you'd see this this closer relationship. Do you see it put more stress on the student than the teacher? In which, for example, a student would be going through something, and a teacher's relationship to that problem in the past would kind of contribute to the outcome of that, where one student would be struggling with their parents, and then the teacher can't really relate to such an issue, or another student might be struggling with loss of a family member, right, in which they can relate to. Do you see that becoming kind of like a general problem on which side of the relationship?
no, I think for the most part, I think teachers do a really good job of being able to kind of filter these things. And if it's beyond their level, we have, procedures and protocols in place where it's like, all right, refer them to the counselor, refer them to me, refer them, get somebody additional help. I almost am of the opinion that, like, I think it's creating a better sense of community, this pendulum swinging in this direction, because I think it's oftentimes I get students who will share with me that they just don't feel comfortable talking to their parents about a number of things, and that's okay, but you have to find your trusted adults, and you have to figure out kind of who your support network can be. And if you don't have that at home, that's okay. A lot of people don't. Not everybody, but a lot of people don't. So I'm glad that they feel like they can reach out to somebody. And who are the other adults in kids' lives? Teachers. So it's they're the ones that see them every day. I know my own personal children spend more hours a day with their teacher than they do with me. I need them to have that good, trusting relationship. Did you have the
the way I see
same type of kind of behavior issues and stuff like that in France that we do here?
But what do you mean behavior issues?
Like, I would say the same kind of, like an example that I've seen before is kids from other countries coming here being like, what do you mean I need to have a bathroom pass and I have to ask to go to the bathroom? Like,
Right.
I can't just get up and go to the bathroom? And everyone's here is like, no, because you'll take advantage of it, you know.
But do you see that being kind of like a little bit too harsh on a student, that strict aspect over
Yeah.
right?
And so, but then I'm kind of like, oh, but maybe these kids can't handle it just because that's our expectations, or maybe it's because teachers are too nice and there's not that strictness and there's not that like formality here, that kids are maybe feeling a little too comfortable, and
Right.
so.
But do you see whereas I was confused because that was such a stark difference, especially when I immigrated. It was ninth grade. That's the way I see it, the pinnacle of all emotional distress in a teenager, especially because ninth grade is included in middle school in France. So I came directly in high school, and I was thrown into a system still with the old standards and out with the old in with the new, but kind of in that like confusing middle ground for me. And do you see students with that struggle here as well, whether they're immigrants or have been in the system a long time?
Ninth grade's a rough year. It's usually not until kids are juniors that I'm like, oh, like, there it is. Yeah. That then they're all of a sudden like looking around being like, oh, wait, no, I'm almost out of here. This is what I want to get out of high school. But I think there's a lot of pros and cons to ninth grade being a part of high school. I'm glad it is. If the relationship with teachers changes, I think kids need an outlet. I feel like so much of students' free time is now dictated by extracurricular activities, through sports, through clubs, through activities, you know, just resume building type of activities that I don't feel like students have a lot of time to learn who they are, experience those kinds of things, and to work on themselves. So you can't maintain that professionalism for 12, 15 hours a day without there being a cost. So I think it's a good thing that kids get to maybe be themselves a little bit more. I feel like there's so much focus on identifying students in need in the past 15 years. And a lot of our like staff meetings and stuff like that are focused on that. Like, how do you tell if a kid's having a hard time? What do you need to identify? What if they need more? And I mean, it's always a reaction, unfortunately, to a school shooting, to a teen suicide, to something along those lines, where it's kind of like, what can we learn from this? How do we grow? And I think part of America's response is, you know, and we're notorious in America for school shootings, and unfortunately that I think it's been that look to teachers to blur those lines a little bit, about those relationships, just to reach out and improve mental health and keep kids safe and, you know, let them know they're there.
Hi, my name is Nia Hilton. I'm the theater and tech theater teacher here at UCHS. And I'm your teacher, Gaspard. That's a fun fact for you.
Good afternoon. I'm Mrs. Hooker, a teacher, a high school teacher here, and I became a teacher not because it was a lifelong ambition, but I kind of fell into it. And after being a teacher for many years, I realized that I was groomed to be a teacher growing up as a child. So it suits me perfectly.
Yes, I'm David West, teacher at University City High School.
Sure. Michael Paul Brown, born June 27th, 1964, Pasadena, California. I am turning 60 in June. I've been teaching at University City High School for the last 30 years. And I have another year, maybe two, left in my career.
My name's Jonathan Schiller. I teach whatever they ask me to, primarily history, art history, whatever else. At University City High School in San Diego, California.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. If I'm introducing myself, why am I blurred? Okay, anyway.
Was becoming a teacher your passion growing up? Did you decide to be a teacher when you were
It
very
was
young?
not, and I'll be honest about it. It was never on my mind. My father was a teacher, so
Right.
that was there, modeled to me as to what I could be, but I just wanted to play baseball. I played all the way through high school, all the way through college, started every game, and as soon as college was over and the draft didn't call my name, I went, uh-oh, now what? I majored in journalism. The economy tanked very recently in 2008, so there weren't many job opportunities for me. So I ended up substitute teaching just to make some money, and it was right first day in the classroom that I went, oh, this is my calling. Got it.
Would you say it's the students that really made you want
Yeah,
to become a teacher?
yeah, it was. And it was a unique situation. I filled in for a teacher who was no longer teaching at the school, so it was an emergency long-term sub, and I was only there from November to June, but by the end of the school year, I had every kid in that class, an engineering class, ask me to come to their graduation. So it was not just the teaching that took place in the classroom and the learning, but in the end it was, oh, I made an impact that they want a photo with me when they graduate. So that felt good.
So where was that shift in your life? When did you want to be a teacher? When did you realize this is my vocation?
Probably 18 years into teaching.
18 years into teaching? Why?
Yeah. Why did it take so long?
As in, you started teaching and then 18 years in, you're like, oh, I want this,
Yeah, because my life was so jam-packed with responsibilities that at first teaching was a job that fit my lifestyle. And I knew how to do it, but I didn't relax and start enjoying it till later, when a lot of my other responsibilities had been met.
As a first question, was becoming a teacher your lifelong passion growing up?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely. Why not?
I come from a family of teachers.
Really?
My father taught high school for 34 years. My mother was a school librarian. My sister's a school teacher. My brother-in-law's a school teacher. My dad's father taught school for a time, but I don't know. I never met him. I don't know him. And so I wanted to do anything but.
But then how did you come to teach?
So after earning my bachelor's degree, I was working at various jobs. I was working in a graphic design job. And it was a company that designed and produced like point of purchase displays. The thing I usually say to people, like, have you ever been in a department store and it has the tester for makeup or perfumes or whatnot? They made those things, amongst many other. And it became terribly repetitive and boring very quickly. And they didn't just design them, they also manufactured them. It just so happened, being in Southern California, a large number of the production staff were Spanish speakers, some of whom had little to no English. And at first, informally, just at lunch, being one of the few people that was, quote unquote, the office staff that would eat lunch with them, would help people practice the kind of the bizarre, the idiomatic, the really wise English like that, things of English. And then it kind of evolved into this almost formal, like, conversational English class. And it became the part of my day that I looked most forward to. Like, I couldn't wait till lunch and to hang out and do that. And I mean, I don't know, is there something genetic? Are there certain personality traits that lend one towards either being interested in or arguably being good at?
Well, you last year you struck me as someone who had always planned to be a teacher, because of how communicative you were with your students.
Yeah, no, not at all. But I think it's one of those, you try to escape your destiny, but the further away you run, you just keep despite your best efforts, running closer to it. And so I don't even know. There was just one day I had an epiphany where what I was doing, like there are only so many times you can design a thing for holding the self-serve beef jerky at the gas station before you're like wanting to rip your hair out.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I enrolled in a teacher credentialing program, and the rest is history.
Do you often find yourself sympathizing with students who are struggling in with mental health or in their life in general, or is that a line you'd rather draw?
Oh, definitely. I am a person who cannot shut off my feelings, you know? I think I tell most classes at the beginning of the year, you'll probably see me cry. And that's normal. Like, that's fine. Humans cry. Humans laugh. Like, it's on the same level, you know? If you're going to see me laugh, you might see me cry. I can't stop it. I'm a crier. That's who I am. And I tell them, like, it's not going to be the end of the world. It's just going to happen. And then the next day will happen, you know? We move on.
Right.
So that's okay with me. I'm happy being open with that with students. Yeah.
But like, beyond that point, is it then harder to teach if you know that, for example, a student is struggling with depression or their parents are being really harsh with them, and all of a sudden you can't enforce, you feel kind of forced to stop yourself from enforcing deadlines or confronting them about their grades? Is it harder for you?
Not necessarily harder. Something that, again, is focused on a lot more in current teacher training practices is meeting students where they are, as opposed to sort of a blanket statement for the entire class.
Right.
So part of that is looking at students as individuals, which, don't get me wrong, is hard when class sizes keep increasing. And so you have to look at 36 individuals, whereas 10 years ago, I would have had to look at 23 individuals. But that being said, you take into account what's going on if a student chooses to be open with you and say, you know, I know you had a very hard night or a very hard weekend. You know, it's not possible that you completed this assignment within one day. Whereas for somebody else, it was possible. So I am going to hold them to that standard. But for this person, something else took priority. And that's okay, because if the end goal is learning, nobody's going to learn from a consequence that was given to them for circumstances that was out of their control.
Do you often find yourself sympathizing with students who struggle with their personal life?
I do, and that's something that a teacher needs to develop a relationship with each student, to understand where they're coming from. Otherwise, you're not going to know what's happening in each student's background.
Right. And because you've said you've answered to previous questions that you like to be involved with the student, that you believe that their own success would be the success of a teacher in teaching them.
Correct.
But do you often find yourself sympathizing too much or not enough with their students to the point where you feel like you've failed at teaching?
For sure. Yeah. There's definitely instances when I feel like I've failed. Let's just go straight up success rate on a quiz or completion rate on an assignment. If
You
that's
take that on you?
I would blame me first of all. It's easy for me to blame COVID, forgiveness
Right.
on late assignments, or you know, other elements that have been thrown at students to support them, now being used as a crux almost by some. I'm going to go back to balance though too.
Go back to balance.
I guess it is all about balance, that I have to, and you were talking about students who might demand more time
Right.
and attention. That's also a balance thing too, because I want to support students who have a crisis or who need to communicate things to me that they're struggling with.
Right.
But I also have a lesson plan I still need to get
Right.
through, and I have
Right.
35 other students in the class who might not be going through that. So definitely that's something I'm not perfect at. That'll always be a year by year, class by class.
Yeah.
Got to adjust and pivot almost, depending on the situation.
In either case, do you think that a teacher should be open about their mental health with their students, or should they be a stable and perfect pillar of influence in their life?
Okay, I believe that the teacher should maintain stability, a stable personality, although I think it's okay to give instances of examples of their life experience. I think that's fine as long as it doesn't represent a collapse of ability.
Right. Well, as a teacher, you're also very involved with students. And you hear a lot of cases should I say, extreme cases, where students grow very attached to their teachers, or sometimes teachers are pushed to the limit because of that expectation from the student, because of that relationship and because of that emotional strain that relationship can have. And my question is, do you believe that teachers should prioritize their own mental health over the class's mental health or an individual's mental health?
It's a good question. We could tie it into putting your air mask on the airplane before you put your child's on, I suppose.
Right.
There are days when, let's say I haven't slept because I have a newborn, things
Right.
didn't go right, last night or the, day before, and I do have to put on somewhat of a face because I'm a leader.
Right.
But I will still openly share if I'm not in the greatest mental place that I was the day before.
Right.
But again, balance. It's got to be there.
Always balance.
I'm still the authority. I'm still expected to accomplish a lesson plan
Right.
by the end of the day or week. So good balance.
What do you consider to be a negative aspect about teaching that isn't the workload?
That isn't what?
That isn't the workload.
Your question gets me thinking about teachers, and I've been guilty of it too. Teachers can be lazy too.
Right.
Adults can be lazy too. And when we have an environment that almost promotes that, the teachers almost need to be conscious of that,
Right.
in that they are a role model and their work ethic is going to rub off on the students. Just like when I have a kid and they're like sponges soaking up everything
Right.
that I'm saying and doing, it's still the same in the classroom, even if they're 14 to 18 years old.
Right.
So outside of the actual work, it would just, would be laziness overall.
So the single most negative aspect about teaching that isn't the workload to you is struggling with the individuality of students coming from different work ethics and whom you'll have to adapt to, in which you'll have to push back. You mean?
Correct.
Right.
And it might, like you asked me earlier, it might rub off on me. Maybe
Right.
I start becoming more lazy because the students are more lazy. That can't happen,
Right.
but
Right.
maybe naturally it does in times.
The push and pull of the
Adults
system.
and students, when they see excuses, sometimes it's more convenient, it's easier, so you take them. I would say teaching for teachers, that can be tempting,
Right.
almost.
Are there any teachers who really strongly impacted you growing up?
Oh,
Whether it's high school, middle school, preschool, any?
Definitely. With this being my alma mater, I can point out some teachers that you might know as well who impacted me. But my biggest influence was Miss Brown. She is not here. She was, of course, the theater teacher here at UC. She just provided us so many opportunities to act, be silly, be creative, take leadership positions, and do what we were passionate about. She always did her best. She gave a lot of her time. We used to have to do 40 hours of weekend work on plays, which meant she also had to be here, giving up her
Right,
weekends.
right.
But that's how we built our sets, because technical theater was not a class back
Right.
then. So she's definitely a huge influence. But also teachers like Miss Fournier, both Hussars I had in middle school. They were all just wonderful teachers who, even though I wasn't particularly passionate about AP Gov, for example, they were great people to just have in my life.
Right. My next question is, as students, we spend 8 hours of our day either working with you or on things you've given us, right? So we're bound to have some kind of attachment to our teachers. And where I come from in France, I gained that attachment through their ways of teaching, through the contents of the course, through their passion of the course. And of course, through the interviews of other students and through conversations, I've found out that a lot of teachers here are defined in quality and defined in how much you appreciate them, in how close of a relationship you have with them. As an example, I was talking to Mr. Schiller, and I hear a lot of students say, oh, he sometimes was a stickler. Sometimes he kind of acted a little too friendly, and then all of a sudden he cut down. And then I hear the other extreme side of the scale, where it's Mr. Nguyen, and he's like, oh, he's super cool, he's super chill, and you never hear about how they necessarily teach directly. And what would be your ideal relationship where students understand what you want out of this professional relationship and you understand them, what they want out of this professional relationship?
Great question. I think I can sum it up as the point of teaching is learning. So that's the ultimate objective. It's not that I teach at them, it's that they absorb the material. If that's my only objective, then how do I manage the class? I would call that a style being firm, fair, and flexible.
Right.
So a little bit of a blend of everything. If you get out of line, you should know enough to get back in line and straighten things out, but I prefer to be as laissez-faire as I can be, and task them with self-responsibility and time management and other adult-like aspects that they should be developing. So to me, it's got to be a balance.
Have you found it hard to draw that line where students don't know how far they should be pushing that limit?
That's student to student, for sure. That's the balance there is the goal. There are some students who need the authority more side of things. There are students who have the initiative and self-motivation where I can just check in with them. So it's definitely differs student to student.
And you have a son, right, recently?
Yeah.
Congratulations.
6 months old. Yeah.
6 months old. And he's probably going to be going through the same high school as you see. If not, so be it. But do you see your methods as a teacher, to your work ethic and your relationship to students change as you see your own son go through the system, as you see it through his eyes on a third-person perspective?
That's a great question. If I tie it directly to students here, I do feel like I'm being pulled because I have a needy son, a son who is vocal and likes to wake up in the middle of the night. So that's going to take me away from time after school, before school, that I could be attending to these students. That's just one element of it. Seeing it through his eyes, I don't know what his generation will look like yet, since he's just a young pup. But I do see excuses and late work and incomplete assignments and a lack of reading being an issue. And that's me being a millennial. So you can say, okay, boomer to me and say that I'm old school, and that's not how it works. But I don't see education changing so quickly to be no reading and just watch this 1 minute video because your attention span, that's all it can handle. So I do think there needs to be a little bit more accountability replaced.
So you see yourself growing stricter?
I do.
Right.
I want to still stay connected to the students at all times. I want to understand what they do, think like they do, but I can't compromise turning in projects 2 weeks late. Like I say, would you hire a painter to paint 70% of your house? In college career tech courses, we're training you for college and careers. So I got to teach you the right way.
Right.
and I might get stricter.
On the same strand of that relationship between students and their teachers, and in some way your relationship with this other teacher that impacted you growing up, is that I noticed when I first moved to California is that the relationship between students and teachers is fundamentally very different. As a teacher, you're expected to be much more sympathetic towards your students, as in if you worry about us, we should worry about you in terms of mental health. And that's just the culture. It's just that relationship has been set up. There isn't much respect necessarily because that, distance being much more shortened where the teachers are involved in a student's personal life, it creates some level of conflict. And the entire reason I'm making this documentary is because recently I was thinking about last year when I had you for AP World, and for Mental Health Day, you mentioned that to start the conversation of mental health, you should talk about it. You should just start talking, right? And you said, I'll be the first one to admit it, I've been to therapy. And I found that very shocking because never, ever have I had a teacher be open about that kind of things, those kinds of things. And my question is, are you comfortable with this aspect of teacher culture?
Yes and no. And here's why I feel like there's two opposing forces there.
Right.
And what you've described, I'd be interested to know when you talked about when you moved to California, in comparison to where, but also that sort of that emphasis and that having, whether I would call it empathy or a willingness to be less rigid with deadlines, let's say, that is, in my experience, really born out of what happened with COVID.
Right.
In the aftermath of that, I would say that there was a sea change, that it wasn't like that, or at least not to the same degree before 2020. But, and I can say this in comparison to my peers, I am less comfortable, I'm less interested doesn't sound right. I am less concerned with knowing all the minutia of the personal life of my students. Certainly if there's something going on that's going to impact their ability to perform in class. I've had students that dealing with the death of a parent or are facing a medical issue themselves. It is only right that you be like, well, you don't want that to become an excuse, but it's only reasonable. Were the shoe on the other foot, you would expect some grace, some accommodation. But I mean, some teachers know who's dating who in the class, and I have zero interest to know that. It changes on the daily in high school anyway. But
would you rather have it that way?
what way? Knowing more about students?
About having that kind of closer relationship. Because, like I said, I've never had a teacher say, I've been to therapy. I, let alone, spent 4 years of my middle school not knowing the first name of my teacher. It's that stark difference in which, where you'll say that, I'll, as a student, and probably a much more immature student, probably coming from middle school, you'd probably have freshmen or maybe even sophomores still that would think, oh, Mr. Schiller shared with me, I have been to therapy. That means he's a safe place. That means he cares. That means he goes beyond.
I think you touched on the key thing. So, like I said, there's this tug of war. I don't want to share too much. I mean, partly it's just personal, private person, but also I'm of the opinion that, and for some students, it's the only place in their life that's stable, or hopefully is.
So you want to be that
is the
stable
classroom.
influence?
And I want there to be a degree of stability. And if I were to be overly sharing about certain things, I feel like it might become a place that felt a little less stable, a little less a place where they know what to. So many students deal with, they don't know what to expect when they walk through the door, whether it's at home or in their community. And I'm not saying it's always that way in every classroom or that my classroom is necessarily what I would want it to be every day, but I would endeavor for, like, if it's the only place in their day that they can go and be relatively certain, they know what to expect, they know what's going to happen, they know that they can feel safe. That's what's important. It's cliche, but it's true, right? There's an old saw in teaching that students, they don't care what you know until they know that you care.
Right.
And so I think that speaks to partly what you're talking about establishing that certain rapport.
Right.
But and it's different, it's not a criticism. We both know a teacher that the kids address her by her first name. No, you're not my peer.
Right.
Which isn't to say I think I'm better than you,
Right.
but there is a certain that relationship. And also, I would like to believe that most days I'm friendly, but I have no interest in being my student's friend.
Right.
That's not what they need from me.
Right.
And I think a lot of, especially young teachers, especially new teachers, I think they go wrong thinking that they need to be quote unquote friends with their students. I don't think that serves them well and also can lead to all sorts of problems.
Right.
But that's not what students are looking, in conversations, and I have them, students, you hear students talk all the time about like, oh, I don't like this teacher and how hard the teacher is on them. But for a lot of kids, they need that person who is like, a deadline is a deadline. This is the structure. It's not negotiable. They need that framework. They need that certainty. Not everybody. Some students really chafe against it.
Right.
But again, a lot of them, if your life is absolute chaos everywhere else, there's something to be said to have that one place where you know. And even if you're like, oh my goodness, I wish they knew X, Y, and Z, and that's why I don't have it turned. There is some benefit to having that person that you know A is A, B is B. There is no debate.
Right.
There is no question. Not that you are so rigid that you can't reasonably accommodate.
Right.
But yeah.
But do you find it difficult to draw that line for students? And do you feel forced to draw that line?
Do I find it difficult? No, not really. I find it more challenging more recently in my career than it was early in my career. And I don't know if it's because my own children are more or less the age of the students I'm teaching at the moment. And so there's some degree of insight and empathy and having a more fresh reminder of what the challenges outside of school are for that particular age. There are things that have happened in my own personal life that I struggle with how much, if any, to reveal. I'll be perfectly frank, I don't remember what you referenced about sharing that. I mean, I take it at your word. I don't think that you're misquoting me. I simply just don't remember that day. But I shared that because, as you said, I think it's important that, especially around mental health, there's so much stigma to normalize caring for and addressing one's mental health.
Right.
It's not something that, it's getting better, but it's not something that we typically discuss in public. And that's mostly the reason I decided to do that. That, and I happen to know, I mean, it's confidential.
Of course.
But I know a lot of students that avail themselves of the mental health services we have here on campus. And I wanted them to know, like, hey, I mean, I'm not saying that I'm the picture of mental health, but a reasonably functional adult also needs that help.
Right.
So,
but between that point where you say that it's important to break that barrier and it's important to start that conversation, and I don't want to know anything about you, and it's important to have teachers be a stable and quote-unquote perfect influence in their life where A is A and B is B and C is C, and you know that you will be the stable environment that they have that they may or might not have at home. So have you drawn a line between that quote-unquote extremity where you talk about mental health and you also don't necessarily see them as responding to that conversation?
that's an interesting question. I don't know that I have a good answer for you.
Have you struggled with that?
Oh, sure. Sure, you're always having to like kind of evaluate and recalibrate. And from class period to class period, let alone year to year, it's going to be different.
Right.
Because in some ways, I've had peers who aren't in education ask, like, doesn't it get like really repetitive? Like you teach the same subject over, like certain things,
Right.
but it's so funny, 55 minutes apart, the same subject, the same class, but two totally sets of, 36 human beings, it becomes an
Right.
entirely different thing.
Right.
And so, it's a little bit tailored to who's sitting in front of you at that particular moment. And I think in my anecdotal observation, I probably tend towards, I certainly don't seek out. What I notice is just the nature of the discipline and having students write, and oftentimes students writing about like personal experience stuff. English teachers tend to know more about the personal life of their students from coursework.
Right.
If students choose to share, it's not like I'm going to like at arm's length, like don't tell me about this, I don't want
Right.
to know it. But I don't seek it out in the way that some of my colleagues do, I guess would be the way I would put it. Because on a certain level, sure, knowing some particular challenge or situation a student finds themselves in can be helpful in understanding why they may be doing or not doing something that is interfering
Right.
with their schooling. But also there's something nice about like for 55 minutes you sit in my class and to the degree that we can, that stuff doesn't matter.
Right.
We can at least be present here and hopefully put that aside. That it's, you got to find whatever sort of the equilibrium to strike the balance between those two.
Right. Well, there definitely are teachers at the school that are a little more strict, but because you said that it was part of your training to be a little more involved with students, would you rather have it a different way? Would you rather not be concerned with us at all and just be as cold and as strict as you want to?
I would rather not give off Miss Trunchbull vibes. I do enjoy, of course, the focus on the subject matter that I teach. That is one of my priorities. But the other one is getting involved in, hearing about my students' weekends and what they were doing and how I can support them, not just in terms of like performance in my own class, but going to see their games, going to academic league and watching them, take wins in that sense.
Right.
I see a school and teachers as part of a larger community, right? We are involved, even if through simply time, in raising the next generation.
Right.
And I am comfortable and enjoy being as involved with that process as I am.
You said that it's emotionally taxing on teaching, and how hard was that tax on your relationship with students?
It would probably be inaccurate to say that it never had any impact, but I would like to believe that I've been able to strike like a healthy balance. There's the tough thing about, again, unlike jobs I had before teaching in other professions, where you punch out on the time clock and go home and you don't think at all about work until you punch in the next morning.
Right.
And this is a job that even when you're burnt out, in fact, maybe more so when you're burnt out, you take it home with you. And there have been a handful of instances, because part of it is you have to like, I can do what I can do,
Right.
and there are things bigger than what I'm able to address. But there have been a handful of instances where like there's a particular student and I'm just lying awake at night thinking about, is there something I can do for them? There's such big things going on in their life completely beyond school that's having an impact on school.
Right.
And, I'm a compassionate human being. There have been times
Right.
where I become aware of what's happening with a student, and it just makes your heart ache for them. Just like if they were a stranger and I didn't know them and you heard their
Right.
story, you'd be like, oh, man, how are they even waking up in the morning? So, at a certain point, you're like, well, if I'm not well, I can't do anything for any of them.
Right.
And so you have to find where that balance is between your own physical, mental well-being and being able to be of service. and not being completely cold and callous and cut off.
Right. Coming from previous interviews, I've kind of built up this kind of conclusion that that a lot of teachers, compared to where I come from, will prefer a friendly professional relationship, or professional friend is the closer word. But Mr. Schiller also touched on this, and he said that if teachers worked year-round, there wouldn't be any teachers who taught more than a year.
Correct.
And it's mostly because of the emotional stress, and because Mr. Schiller said this. He said that sometimes he'll think of a student and he'll lie awake at night asking himself, like, are they okay, or what are they going through? But that boundary between them is stopping any kind of advancement, in which they'll be like, well, go see Dr. A, but they'll still worry, right? And do you experience these kind of like this huge amount of emotional strain with this relationship?
Yes, to a point. When I started teaching, the neighboring class was Mr. Jason. He was my senior English teacher as well, and he was about close to retiring age. He had been teaching for 30-some years. And he came over one day and he said, Nia, the reason why I have been able to teach for so long is because I have never in my life taught summer school. I said, okay, noted. Never teach summer school. Always give myself that break.
Right.
But yes, I definitely agree with Mr. Schiller.
Right.
There's no way that teachers could teach year-round and be as involved in students' lives as they are and keep going year after year after year. People say that when you start teaching, your first 3 to 5 years are your hardest, and that weeds out a lot of people from the profession. But if you make it past that, you're sort of in it for life.
Right.
I have gone into the profession of teaching with a different sort of mindset. I started 4 years ago now, thinking to myself that I will teach for 10 years and then I will change my career. I know myself pretty well through, shout out to therapy. And I'm open about that as well.
Right.
I think 10 years will be a good amount of time for me to be a teacher and for me to be like dedicated to my students. But after that, I know that like the quality of my teaching would just fall off because
Right.
I would have inevitably be burnt out. And like Mr. Schiller said, lose sleep over thinking about students' situations, which is completely valid, but not sustainable in the long run for myself.
Right. What would you say would be a negative aspect of teaching that isn't the workload?
That isn't the workload.
That isn't the workload.
It can be, I mean, it's in part due to the workload, but also things separate from, it can be tremendously emotionally taxing.
In what way? That which you're comfortable with saying,
I
of course.
mean, and unfortunately, I think we all know teachers who have, for whatever reason, reached a point where they're emotionally just shut off from the job and just going through the motions.
Right.
But if you aren't that, I mean, we would call that burnout, right?
Right.
But if you're not that, it's sort of impossible to be around a couple of hundred adolescents every day and not get exhausted
Right.
by that. I mean, let's be honest, one of the characteristics of adolescence is feeling intensely.
Right.
And so having to deal with that, trying to be a steadying, calming influence on that, it could be exhausting, but also in the sense of knowing the challenges that some students have and what's going on in their lives, you know, it's heartbreaking.
Right.
And this was not myself, but like I said, I have family members who are teachers.
Right.
I have colleagues who just talked about, especially as a new teacher, the little tips and tricks or knowing what to anticipate will happen and then having already put in place structure or already have plans for contingencies that when you're new, you simply don't know what you don't know.
Right.
I know people that their whole first year of teaching went home and cried every day because they didn't feel like they'd been successful, or the kids had completely derailed the lesson because they didn't anticipate X, Y, and Z that was going to happen.
Right.
Or
Do you see that as emotionally taxing to your ego? Have you experienced
I mean,
that?
sure, some of it is ego. I think some of it is simply, again, if you're not just burnt out and completely disconnected from it, you want to do a good job. And I don't know that there's ever been a day that I felt 100% of kids got 100% what I wanted them to get.
Right,
There's always that, what could I have done better?
right,
And I think it's just part of the job, and you have to learn how to manage that and manage expectations, which isn't the same as saying like, well, I'm going to accept just a certain percentage of kids are just going to fall through the
right,
cracks.
right.
But there's a reason, and I don't think it's for the kids, there's a reason why we have a summer break. If teachers worked all but 2 weeks a year like other professions, no one would stay in the profession. I don't think you would have the endurance to do it. There are people who teach summer school every summer. I mean, there's obviously financial benefit to it. I have not touched summer school since the summer after my first year as a teacher,
But
because I needed the money for a honeymoon.
right,
I haven't taught summer school again because finishing summer school and then like, wait, I have to go back in 2.5 weeks. It made the
But-
whole next school year just, you started off at a point where I have this marathon to run, but I just got done running a marathon and I don't want to.
Right. You mentioned that the first 10 years of teaching when you started out were kind of discovering the aspects of teaching. And then you started connecting with students, you started being more aware of how you teach, of the program, and then now you're saying, I'm just too full of it, man. Sorry.
Yeah, that's part of what happens when you get to my age.
But
You
is it
know,
harder now to connect with students?
No,
with that?
not at all. As a matter of fact, that's going to be the hardest thing to leave. What keeps me really enjoying the job, believe it or not, is my students. It's someone like you,
Right.
like the relationships I have. Just because, I deal with some really amazing kids. 16 and 17-year-olds. And some pretty cool kids. Conversations, and if I can give them any kind of foundations or advice or something in a positive way that they'll take from my classroom, or just a space where they feel comfortable being and wanting to come every day. And that's why I do all sorts of crazy things, why I play music and show you multimedia aspects to my teaching, and from lecture to clips to photographs to music to it's an eclectic mix. I just want my students to be
Sorry for all the bells.
I won't miss that. That's for sure. The
Yeah.
church bells, yeah. And that's what I mean. That's industrial time. It's like,
Yeah.
I've lived that for 30 years. I'm done.
Quite the
you
emotional
could
struggle,
probably
yeah.
already tell. I'm going to try and push it, but I don't know. But no, that's the hardest thing for me is leaving that, because I'll tell you, when you get to be my age, you start thinking about your life's work. Was it worth it? Did you have an impact? Was it all about me, or was it, was there some greater purpose that God put you here on this earth for? And I feel like I've served that purpose. It may not have been unveiled to me right now, but I think, you have a lot of students that come through here that you may never see again, but you never know how you've impacted them.
I always end up begging the question, how much of the relationship should be the student's responsibility? How much of it should be your responsibility? Should they learn through repetitive conversations that my teacher isn't my therapist, or should you be the person to truly write down that limit for them, to tell them no?
That's interesting. And, I have zero experience with, for instance, what it's like in France, so I wouldn't be able to draw an informed comparison. But it's one of the things, talking about the flaws in our educational system, and I would say our society more broadly. But the informally, what is expected from teachers, so it's not just being content experts and delivering instruction. They informally are becoming social workers. They informally are becoming resource specialists that are locating for how can you get glasses so you can see what's on the board
Right.
if you don't have the financial wherewithal to afford that. You know, it's just all these things that in other countries they seem to have come up with better solutions to address. It feels like the things schools are expected to do, there have been more and more and more things that have landed in the lap of schools because we do service the entire community
Right.
that are beyond the scope of really what schools should be.
So you believe that the student should be the one understanding and carrying most of the
I don't know if I'm saying
part
that.
of the.
I don't know that I have a good answer for that question.
Would you say you're still figuring it out?
Sure. And there are definitely things I thought were true and correct earlier in my career that I think completely differently now.
How different was your first year of teaching, like mentally and like ethics-wise? Were you like going in being like, I don't want to mess with like any of you. You're all filthy, deodorant lacking teenagers.
Well,
I want nothing to do.
I started my career teaching middle school, so that's a whole other thing.
Different
anyway.
beast.
Yeah, no, I think it was way more formal, and you might say uptight,
Right.
not wanting to mess up, right?
Right.
And have become more relaxed, more. I mean, even down to the way I dressed. Like I used
Right.
to wear a tie every day.
I had Miss Hooker tell me that she used to do like full like suit and like
Yeah,
nice dress shirt, and now it's just like joggings, you know?
Well, part of it is when I moved to San Diego, just San Diego generally, but also amongst faculty, so much less formally dressed.
Right.
I mean, I'm wearing a hoodie and jeans, and I'm
Right.
still one of the more formally dressed faculty. He's
Right.
retired now, but I'm not going to name names. But there was a colleague who wore shorts, a classroom teacher, PE teacher, that makes sense. Classroom teacher who wore shorts every day. I never saw the man with his legs covered, and I can't imagine coming to work wearing shorts. There's a degree of informality that I personally am not comfortable with.
Well, there's the line.
That's the line.
There's
That's
the
what we've
line.
established. Okay,
Shorts.
interview's over. Done.
But I the other day I interviewed Mr. Schiller, and he touched on the same topics as you did, whereas you kind of branched off to a different direction that he did. He mentioned the emotional strain that teaching has. He in his words, he said that it's really hard to go beyond that friendly professional relationship that a teacher will have, because it will keep you at night sometimes to hear those stories of students.
Well, I'll tell
going
you,
through
you know,
things.
it seems like every year there are things that go down.
Right.
And those things stick with you. They kind of become those tin cans that rattle behind you, you know. And I have definitely memories, you know, over the years of situations that were disturbing and unfortunate. You know, I'll tell you, you know, try to understand this. I see 160 clients a day.
Mm-hmm.
I can't just come into work and have some coffee and
Sorry.
I just can't come into work and have some coffee and read the paper and answer a few telephone calls and, you know, dig into my computer or something.
And then
like
be
that.
expected
It's like
to-
boom, and I
yeah.
got a classroom of 36, and I got 5 of those a day. So think about giving 5 presentations every day to 160 clients,
Right.
Monday through Friday. So you're fatigued. You're, you know, mentally, physically. You know, I use all my words.
Right.
I go home, I've used all my vocabulary that a man is capable of using in one day. It's about 5,000 words. Yeah, so that's an issue. And then there's some other issues that you know, kind of, I think in the back of their minds haunt teachers. You know, we think about, you know, drug overdoses. You know, I've had kids who've had seizures in class, who've passed out in class because of alcohol, who are smoking pot before they come to class. You know, I'm worried about some kind of incident coming onto campus, you know, a shooter, you know, all of, you know, what if there's a massive earthquake and I'm responsible for all these kids' safety. And, I'm all ready for that, I'm prepared mentally and we've been trained, but it's just that uncertainty that, you're dealing with minors, you're dealing with children, you're the adult, whether it be child abuse or anything, a fight on campus, that's stressful, So it is a stressful job.
Kind of to close off this interview, I kind of leave this open-ended question for teachers to kind of say whatever they want to say, and that is, do you have any closing thoughts on this? Do you have anything that you've been meaning to say but haven't found kind of an opportunity to express it to your students because you tell yourself, it's irrelevant, oh, they won't care, oh, what's something that you want to say or that you've been meaning to say, or just an idea?
Just in general.
Just in general.
That's a good Gaspard. I want to see other teachers' responses to this, by the way. I'd like to see that end product, or even the unedited product.
So there's a lot to work on, and I'm enjoying each year with the new challenges that come up with our society, and working with that, because I know that one day I will see my students in a position where I need them, right. Somewhere in the community. I'll be relying on them, and I want to make sure that they have the skills they need to be successful. Right. And so I am proud that I've kind of been a stickler with those kinds of things, and I think it's all good. So. Yeah, so thank you for asking me about my thoughts on the subject.
Of course. Let's go generationally with the students who are here now.
Right.
If I look at AI developing, because to me it's in the tech world that I teach in, it's taking over, and I'm good at finding tactics that students use to work less. Right. I think, and I've heard it from Mark Cuban, I've heard it from other entrepreneurs who see this coming, the most important job skill in the next 10 years arguably is going to be creative thinking. It is a need to break the mold of, I'll call out what Pixar and Disney are doing, is making a bunch of remakes, making a bunch of sequels, expanding your universe, right. Which doesn't take as much creativity as it does creating something from scratch. So I would really, really encourage these young students here at UC to strive to develop creativity, right. in your own brains. And that, sure, it might start by modeling something off of something else, right. But it needs to evolve into your own true creation. I think that's how we beat AI. I think that's how we redevelop as critical thinkers.
Well, that's a pretty profound question. I think the only way I can do it is to be real. And this was a quote that I put my senior year in my high school yearbook from Jimi Hendrix, "If 6 was 9. I'm going to be the one that's going to die when I'm going to die. So let me live my life the way I want to."
Is there a message to students?
Could be. You got to follow your dreams, man. You got to find your path. You got to, plow through it, for better or worse. You're going to hit roadblock after roadblock after roadblock. And what it's about is how you climb over those roadblocks, whether you go over it, under it, around it. But, you got to be like water, basically, you got rocks and boulders and, you got to find paths, and just kind of flow with it. I think that's what I want to teach them, about the octopus, which is awesome. And you got to see the Octopus Teacher, because that will really kind of touch you about humanity, about the world, about relationships, but be like water. You got to flow.
There are obviously multiple things, but I'll pick out a few. I think I said this to my cast in the last play. I'm not interested in creating stars in theater. I'm interested in creating better people through theater. That's the foundation of like the majority of my pedagogy. Also, I would just like to remind students that like your teachers are people. They're just doing their best in their day-to-day life. And sometimes they're gonna piss you off, and that's okay, because people in life are gonna piss you off.
Right.
And you still have to interact with them. You still have to show them a degree of politeness and respect. We are in a microcosm of a community within a school. And when you are released to the larger community after graduation, much stays the same, only you're a little bit better off
Right.
than you were.
Do you have any closing thoughts? Anything you've been meaning to say to your students? Because, you know, this is going to be shown to students. And what have you been struggling to say to your students that you'd like to close this interview with?
I would like to believe that most of my students already realize this. That there's a certain degree of, like when I get asked by students, oh, I'm your favorite student, right?
Right.
And my canned answer, because I find it humorous, is like, oh no, I dislike you all equally. That's not genuine, right? That there's
Right.
sort of, I put up, it's a character, it's an act to a certain degree, this
Right.
facade of like being this gruff, like, oh, you darn kids and your hippity hop music. But that even the ones that just are just a pain,
Right.
right? That I genuinely feel privileged and blessed to be able to spend time with them each day, and that I, hopefully I have at a baseline. I hope I have at least a neutral impact on their lives,
Right.
and hopefully something more
Right.
positive, and that to the degree capable for 180 of them, that I care about them and their well-being, and I want them to do well, and I want them to find whatever happiness looks like to them.
All right.
And that's really what I don't care if you remember the Battle of Hastings happened
Right.
in 1066. I care that you feel equipped to, maybe you'll never achieve it, but at least strive for the life that you want to have for yourself and have a clear picture of what that life is.
That's a wonderful way of closing this interview. Thank you, Mr. Schiller.
Well, thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.